Good evening. At 6 o'clock, I'd like to call to order the meeting of this Mountain View Wisman School District Board of Trustees. We have a very large group of students here from Gabriela Mistral. Is that correct? Would you all like to come up and help us do the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Thank you. If you could come up and then turn around, there's the camera right behind you. Yeah, thank you. All
More
stand?
towards the middle, buddies.
Yeah, can you guys
What's the
slide
middle?
over this way, just like 2 steps, so that you're kind of in the middle of the camera? Perfect. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And now we'll do our student showcase.
Parents and board members, administrators, we are very happy to represent our wonderful school, Gabriela Mistral. And for that, we have a special poem for Gabriela Mistral. Sorry, thank you. So we have a special poem for Gabriela Mistral, and they're also gonna sing a song in English and a song in Spanish. So I'm gonna ask you to maybe applaud at the end of the performance. That'd be great. Okay.
Yay. Gracias.
Bravo. Gracias.
Gracias.
Muy gracias. So cute. That was a great song.
Wow,
Thank
Qué
you.
bonitos.
Gracias. Muy bonitos.
Gracias.
been one in our crowd.
What did you say? Muy lindo cantando? Is that in the wrong order?
Cantar.
Cantando, singing, beautiful singing.
Qué bonito es
Qué bonito
cantar.
es cantando. Okay. Okay, I think now will be the time to go for roll call.
Laura Blakely.
Ellen Wheeler.
Jose Gutierrez Jr.
Tamara Wilson. And let the record reflect that all 5 trustees are, well, 4 of them are present in the current location, and Trustee Conley is at the Wheat Ridge, Colorado site. She's calling in and still present here at the meeting with us. So all 5 trustees are virtually and or here. So we've gone through roll call. Let's go on to the approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, on a motion moved by Trustee Gutierrez and seconded by Trustee Wheeler, the approval of the agenda passes unanimously. We'll move on now to opportunities for members of the public to address the board concerning items on the closed session agenda. Seeing as there are none, at 6:10, we will adjourn to closed session. Thank you. I will reconvene this session of the Mountain View Wisman School District Board of Trustees. I'd like to report that no action was taken in closed session. Trouble with this. We do still have a quorum. We have 3 here, and we have Trustee Conley calling in on the phone from Colorado to get folks at home up to speed and those in the room to know who's available. And I believe Trustee Gutierrez is on his way. We will start off with consent agenda. Can I get an
I
approval?
move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any opposed? Okay, on a motion moved by Trustee Wheeler and seconded by Trustee Blakely, the motion passes with Trustee Gutierrez absent. And we will move on now to communications from employee organizations. Are there any representatives of employee organizations here to speak to the board? Okay, seeing as there are none, we have district committees. Any representatives? And we'll move on to superintendent.
No updates.
Okay, so now is the time we'll move to community comments. This is a time reserved for community members to address the board on items that are not on the agenda. The board and administration welcome this opportunity to listen. However, in compliance with the Brown Act, the board is not permitted to take action on non-agenda items. I believe, do we have any speakers here to address the board on items that are not currently on tonight's agenda? Seeing as there are none, we will move on to review and discussion, our dashboard update. Dr. Rudolph?
All right, good evening. I'm here to talk about the dashboard as well as updates to progress towards goals. I've lost the.
And can I ask you, looking at our agenda, there's two, there's a goals and there's update. Which presentation are we going to be looking at?
I've actually combined both of them together.
So
Yep.
we don't have this presentation you're giving us.
No, you have it.
So which one is it?
The dashboard update?
The dashboard update as well as the progress towards goals.
Which one do you want us to look at first?
The one dated 11/4?
Right. So you have a PDF of the actual dashboard, and then there is a dashboard goal update. Within there, you have also the progress towards goals.
So the second URL is the one you should click on, the SB 2021 dashboard and board goals update. That should be this presentation behind us, is that correct? Thank
Correct.
you.
Okay, so just to take us back and how the dashboard was actually created in 2015, 2016, the strategic plan 2021 was approved. And with that, in addition to the strategic plan, trustees started to develop yearly goals that outline important initiatives for that particular year. And after that, the staff, at the request of the board, created a dashboard, which is an at-a-glance accountability measure to help staff, trustees, and the public monitor the progress of the yearly goals, as well as progress towards the action items that are listed in the strategic plan 2021. So to understand the dashboard, which was included in the presentation, there are 4 indicators that are used by the battery signals, meaning that blue is completed ahead of schedule, green, yellow or orange in progress, and then red means that there's actually a remediation plan that is required. And then in addition to that, we use light bulbs that show progress towards the yearly goals that are required by the board. And so one of the things that we do is we review the progress towards these goals monthly, and we update these throughout the year in order to sort of track how we're going. And then in the event, so our next update is actually scheduled for April, which is typically around the time that we have a retreat to set our next year's goals. And then after, at the end of the year, we provide a final update to the Board of Trustees. And with that, and so since the dashboard was actually included in the presentation, I wasn't going to go through each particular action item. I think it's pretty straightforward in terms of where we are in certain ones. But I do want to highlight the board goals and give sort of a quick update on those, some of which we've already talked about. So one will be presented today, and another one we've already talked about, but I want to at least give some updates of where we are. So the first one is for EL Board Goal 1. There was a change in how we monitor this. The focus of the board goal led us to uncover some issues that were needed to be addressed in order to ensure success for all English language learners. And again, this is a previous presentation. And so we changed the goal slightly to capture the English learner's whole experience within Mountain View, and focused on reclassification just as opposed to proficiency on the LPAC assessment. And so we revised the goal to focus on a cohort model that followed kids entering in K each year beginning in 2017-18, which is the first year of the administration of the LPAC, with a target goal of 75% of all kids will be reclassified who have entered in kinder, with 85% of our English language learners being reclassified by the end of 8th grade. And so doing that, we had to redo our cohorts. So for those who are watching or for those who are just tuning in, the original cohorts were multi-grade levels, and it was by the year of entry, not by the specific year of the cohort. While that gave us a lot of insight and allowed us to track kids who entered or who had 6 years, which is a part of the original goal, what it did not do is help us understand which grade levels may need additional assistance, or what type of professional development we needed to enact in order to change certain outcomes. And so through the revision, we were able to create new cohorts. And the way that we call these cohorts is actually the year that they will leave us in a particular year. So this slide right here shows you our current kinders is actually cohort 2028, and then we count downwards every single year. So our true first cohort through the LPAC, the first kids that were administered the assessment is cohort 2026. But since we redefined the way that we looked at the goal, we were able to redefine every single grade level and look at them as their own individual cohort, regardless of what year they entered. And that will change some of the numbers that you see, but at least it gives an idea of how kids are performing grade level to grade level. And so, in looking at that, what we started to see so far is we'll start with our earliest cohort, which is the 2026 group. Thus far, we have reclassified 23% of all students, with another 13% of the students, or 16 students, who are actually eligible for reclassification once that takes place in the fall. If you see in 5th grade, and this is one of the questions that came up earlier, was, well, are we setting the target so low that it's kind of hard or it's easy for us to attain? But you'll see our current 5th graders are if we were to apply the same metric in 5th grade that we're targeting now, only 61% of our kids are at reclassification, which means that we would need to reclassify 14%. Now, there are 29% of those kids that are eligible for reclassification, but just because they're eligible doesn't mean that they necessarily reclassify. It just means that they passed the LPAC assessment and need to go through further requirements in order to get there. And one of the things we noticed was we had a number of kids who had passed the LPAC, but for one reason or another did not meet the reclassification criteria moving forward. So it shows us that there is some targeted work that we need to do with the 63 kids, or the 18 kids, to make sure they meet the requirements to be reclassified, but it's not a guarantee that they necessarily will reclassify. In addition to that, if you look at the 8th grade, which is an 85% target, we have 77% that have actually reclassified, with another 18% who are eligible for reclassification, and one student who's at level 4 but hasn't met the criteria. So there's still some work that has to be done in order to get there, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But this gives us a cleaner idea of where we can focus on and what is taking place at a particular grade level. And what you can see is that in 1st grade, which would have been the last year's cohort, we have 25% of our kids who we now need to track, or 9 kids who have met level 4, but who have not met the reclassification criteria. And so we need to provide additional assistance for them, and we can focus on them a little bit more targetedly. So one of the first steps, so one of the things that we've also changed is that when a kid passes the LPAC assessment, one of the things we noticed is that we were only giving them one particular chance to meet the second criteria in order to reclassify. And there are 4 different criteria that are needed for a kid to go through. And so the way that we restructured our reclassification criteria is once they pass the LPAC, and this is through the state, they then needed to prove that they were proficient on a grade level assessment, which means that they could use either the language arts assessment, LITABLY, which measures the reading fluency of a student, or it was the CAPS score. So now, through this revision, we now give kids multiple rounds in order to prove that they are proficient or that they can meet their criteria. So those 9 kids that we talked about who are in 1st grade, they now have 3 more chances before reclassification ceremony to meet the requirement to reclassify. And they can do that through the iReady language arts assessment. They can do it through the trimester 1 LITABLY assessment. And if that doesn't happen, they can go to round 3, which is the iReady language arts assessment, the second one, which is about to be administered, as well as the 2nd trimester LITABLY assessment. And then, of course, if you look, in the event that they miss that and they still are level 4 in the LPAC when they take it at the end of the year, they will then have yet another round 1 start up again. So we've now increased the number of chances that a kid can reclassify, as opposed to our original approach was when a kid met the LPAC requirement, they had to either pass immediately either the trimester 3, the litably, or they had to pass a CAS in order to be reclassified, and then we didn't do anything with them. The second one is the year's worth of growth. So this is board goal 2. And we actually have a presentation on this coming up, and so I'm going to fly through this one also. So iReady is an online program that helps us to assess our students for strengths and weaknesses. We wanted to meet several criteria when we selected iReady. The first one was that we wanted a predictive assessment that could be correlated with CAS performance. The second one is that we heard loud and clear from parents that there wasn't enough information that was being provided to parents about how the kids were performing. And so we wanted parents to know 2 things: how their kids were performing and what areas they were struggling in. But also we wanted parents to see how the kid was growing over the course of a year through various assessments, something that we didn't provide in the benchmark. The last piece of this is that we also had teachers who were working on the assessment who had to wait for the assessments to be graded, checked, and for the scores to be released in order to act on the information. And so we wanted to close the loop a little bit faster on providing teachers with the assessment information so that they can make their groupings a lot faster. And then I think the last piece of this is, and you'll see this in the presentation, staff also wanted to make sure that we had a system in place where we could monitor the performance of all of our students as well as all of our sites so that we could decide if there was some targeted assistance that was actually needed at a particular school, which again, you'll see coming up in the iReady presentation in terms of how schools are actually performing, at least on the initial assessment, and then we have the next assessment coming up at the end of this trimester, which will give us additional data. The next one is the implementation of STEM. So we chose at the end of the year, we brought back through a committee of individuals that was set up through our Chief Academics Officer's department. We had RTI teachers as well as science teachers and coaches sit down and determine what would be the appropriate way to introduce STEM in all of our schools. We presented 3 options with a recommendation to choose option 3, which is to revise the RTI instructional model to now use that as a science base as opposed to English and language arts. And we made that decision deliberately because we had several schools that were already using that particular model, but also we felt like it was the easiest way for us to assure that every kid would get a minimum of 2 days of science instruction for all kids. And so we also, through this decision, partnered both with Discovery Education to provide coaching and training, but we also partnered with Sciences Elementary, which has been a long-time partner of ours, to provide next-generation science standards training for all of our teachers across the board, so that teachers can integrate the standards into their everyday classes. And so our teachers part of our decision to do this is that every RTI teacher will provide, at the elementary schools, will provide a minimum of 2 days per week through their lessons. And then we designed, as part of our goal, we designed a sort of a 3-year implementation process. We started off with training the teachers as well as the administrators and creating monthly collaboration sessions for our RTI science teachers. We are currently using the FOSS materials with modified pacing and lesson structures that was designed by our Director of Curriculum and Assessment. And then we also are currently looking at the review and piloting of new materials that are coming through the state in order to determine what new science adoptions we need to have. Year 2 continues all of those similar practices, except it now includes the science and engineering practices that are required by the next generation science standards, as well as the 5E model of science instruction. But it also involves the implementation of a new science curriculum next year, provided that the board chooses to move in that fashion. And then year 3 is a training for all teachers and again, all administrators in order to implement the curriculum. And I think at that point, we would reassess whether or not we feel like RTI is still the appropriate venue to drive science, or do we want to look at it on a larger sense. And then board goal 4 is for us to explore different options in terms of increasing revenue. So each of us, all the administrators are charged with looking for ways to increase revenue. Sites have been looking at encouraging teachers to use outside sources as, I'm trying to remember, it's not GoFundMe, it's as Donors Choose, applying for grants, working with MVEF, but we've also explored the options of a bond or parcel tax, which we've put in front of the board. There are several items that we cannot discuss because they fall under current negotiations that we have brought to the board. We've looked at the impact of a solar program to bring down our costs. And then also we have entered into an agreement with the JPA that we would explore over the next couple of years. Well, we have an amendment to bring in a residential property, but we also said that we would reevaluate the JPA agreement between now and the end of its term, which is 2023, which all 3 parties, the city, Mountain View, Los Altos, as well as Mountain View Westman, agreed to. So our next step is that we will continue to provide updates. We will bring back the dashboard at the end of trimester 2. I do need to point out that we need to revise the strategic plan, and we need to align that with a new LCAP. The LCAP actually runs 3 years, and so this strategic plan was only a 5-year plan. The next strategic plan needs to be a 6-year plan. That way it keeps it always in sync with the LCAP, so that when any revisions to the LCAP takes place, it will coincide exactly with the strategic plan. And then remediation plans will be developed when it's feasible. There are some things which was communicated in the questions that just because of other priorities that have came to the forefront that we have sort of put to the back burner, and we're currently evaluating whether or not we can actually effectually execute those items this year. And that's it.
Okay, we'll open it up to questions from board members. Trustee Gutierrez?
Dr. Rudolph, so for the revised strategic plan, in terms of the next steps, is that going to be, you probably already explained this once, but just for the record, how do we plan to tackle that? Will we also have community input like we did originally, or is this something that's going to be done by whom and by when?
Mm-hmm. So we're currently working on the full redesign of it. I think our strategic plan is really in a good place in that it's really about updating the strategic plan and really about just assessing what new initiatives need to take place. So I don't envision us going through the extensive process that we went through before of bringing in an outside consultant, doing school quality reviews and district quality reviews of the schools. Since its inception, we have conducted LCAP surveys every single year. We have done climate surveys. So we have a lot more information available to us than what we did in 2015 when we first started. And I believe that unless the board has a different idea, I believe that the 5 goals that we currently have are still applicable in terms of student achievement, the achievement gap, human resource or human capital, engaging parents, and resource stewardship. So I think those 5 still apply. I do, however, envision the actions under those will sort of change and need some updating, and that's really what we're going to try to do. And in conjunction with our LCAP, it's just bringing those items to the forefront and sort of reworking them. So I guess the long-winded answer of this is I do not envision a 300 meeting process that we used last time to create a strategic plan. I think this one's a lot easier.
About 100? I'm just kidding.
What I can assure you, though, is that we will make sure that we get feedback from all of our relevant groups and that we will engage them on it. I think it's similar to what we're currently doing with our master's facility plan. There were items on there that we just didn't finish, but there are still some of the similar objectives that were in the master facility plan still hold true today. And it's really about revising it and saying, look, for the master facility plan, we spent 10 years working on this particular plan. We know what we did do, what we didn't do. We know what our future constraints are, how we're going to address those constraints. And so it doesn't require such an extensive process.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Conley, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you. So I really appreciate all the work that's gone into this presentation and the work that you were doing on the board goals as well as the dashboard. There are a lot of things the district is doing at once right now, and so I don't want to lose that big picture. At the same time, I did submit questions about 3 items that are in the red that have to do with culturally responsive teaching, culturally responsive interactions or communications from staff with all stakeholders, and then professional development for all of our staff on culturally responsive customer service. I dug back through the dashboard updates from last year, so November 1st, 2018 at that board meeting, and then also the year before, which was February 1st, 2018, when there were dashboard updates. And so 2 years ago, in the 2017-2018 school year, there was an item on professional development on staff about culturally responsive customer service, and it was yellow then. And the item on staff communicating with stakeholders in a culturally responsive manner was yellow in 2017. And the PD in culturally responsive teaching wasn't in that dashboard at the time. And then move forward a year, so last year, the professional development for staff was yellow. The staff will communicate with all stakeholders in culturally responsive manner was red last year. And again, we still didn't have the PD on a culturally responsive teaching. And so this year, all 3 are red. I understand the PD on culturally responsive teaching, I think, is new to the dashboard.
It is this year.
It makes sense to me that would be red. But I'm curious about the 2 that have been on there this is their 3rd year. If you could speak a little bit more to what happened between last year and this year. I did not look at the video of those meetings when I went back through. I just looked at the printed dashboard. So I'm wondering if you could give me some context.
Sure. In the 2016-2017 school year, all of our staff, our site secretaries, our district office staff, and our clerks went through culturally responsive training in customer service, and so that was stage 1 of the professional standards. In addition to that, we also talked about how we would communicate with and develop communication standards across the board. And then in year 2, we actually, as we were looking for professional development for administrators, we then went to bringing in Dr. Noriega to come in and work with our principals. And it was our intent at the start of this year to have Dr. Noriega come in and meet with all of our staff at the beginning of the year, but because of a schedule conflict, he was unable to attend to do our all-hands service. And so in doing that, what we also realized is that we didn't effectively engage both bargaining units to talk about what was an appropriate approach to train everyone on culturally responsive training. One of the challenges that we have across the board is that the type of professional development for culturally responsive training is either geared to classroom practices, or it is, which at time can, our district a couple years, actually right before I came here, had Dr. Muhammad come through and do an assessment, and it, his audit really it didn't go over well, to say the least, with staff, because it's hard to have a staff that is mainly female and mainly white, and to have, in this case, Dr. Muhammad's an African American, come in and say that you're not doing X, Y, and Z for your kids, and for it to be received well, because I think, you know, our teachers, our staff work really hard to make sure they're meeting the needs of all the kids. But to hear that information, whether it's true or not, and I wasn't here at the time, was a very hard pill to swallow. And so we have been struggling to find a professional development approach that really meets that is honest enough to say that we have work to do, but not so off-putting that it doesn't turn everyone off from the hard work that we're doing. And so we were really excited about Dr. Noriega possibly doing additional training. But as we started working with Dr. Noriega and were sort of given the opportunity to work with his son, I think we started to say that that wasn't really the intent or sort of the focus that we were looking for. We were really looking forward to working with Dr. Noriega, who's a renowned expert, as opposed to his son. And so we've struggled with finding professional development. And then the second piece I will say is that as the goals or as items have been added to the plate, we just have not had the time to circle back to work on this. Sitting on my desk currently is which would have been the next part of this training, is to do an actual assessment of the district to sort of see where we are and then design a plan of action. I think just with everything that we're currently working on, it's just not, we could do the assessment, but we wouldn't do the assessment any service because it would just be the act, and as opposed to an honest conversation with each one of our stakeholders about where we currently are. And so that's why it's identified in the red.
But at least,
I appreciate it.
based on the site plans, at least one or two of the schools is doing things on their own, and maybe not as on as comprehensive of a basis.
Right.
But it seems to me like that might be a good starting point, you know, and if it's successful at certain schools, that some of those practices could be shared.
Right. I think just for the strategic plans focus, it was our goal was for a district-wide rollout of something. And, you know, again, this goal actually falls under my purview as well as a couple other people, but I just have not had the chance to sit down with staff to effectively draw this out and to say this is how we're going to approach it. And I don't want to rush through something as important. But I believe this also presents a great opportunity for this to be ported over to the new strategic plan. And for us, you know, one of the things we learned in the first iteration of the strategic plan was that we were very ambitious about the number of goals that we had. And if you look at the original strategic plan, and then you looked at its immediate revision, I think it's from green to blue or blue to green. It's one of those two. You will see a lot more action items on there. And then the board actually sat down with us and said, you know, let's be realistic about what we can actually get accomplished, and are there items that need to be removed. I don't believe that this item needs to be removed. I just think we need to be more realistic about how we implement it. And I think, you know, with everything else that we had on our plate, we were very ambitious in thinking that we could get this done. Considering that we, you know, at that time, we didn't have board goals that we would be focusing on, nor did we have development projects that we'd be engaged in. And so I think all of that just finally caught up to us. And so again, with the strategic plan 2026, we should be able to pull something off.
Sounds good.
Other questions from board members? Other members of the community that would like to address the board at this time? How about comments from trustees?
So when it does come down to trying to figure this out, you'll develop something ahead of time so that we can have a good conversation about it, or will you work with whom to figure that out and then present it to the board?
So we will come, similar to what we've done in a couple other items, we'll come back to the board with a plan of action. Here's what we're thinking, get feedback on that before we move forward. And what I would like to do is base that off of an assessment that we found that really gives an honest sort of approach of where we are, and allows us to move forward. But yes, we'll bring back a plan of action.
Okay, thanks.
Trustee Conley, any additional comments?
I just want to say thank you for all of the work that's going into this, the strategic plan and all of the board goals. It is a tremendous amount of work, and it's quite a breadth, but it's exciting to see so much action that's taking place that we're working on for students.
Thank you.
All right, I think at this time we'll move on to item B, questions for Mountain View City Council regarding school strategy. Dr. Rudolph?
Yep. So one of the things we have on November 26th is a meeting with City Council, 2 representatives from City Council along with staff, as well as 2 elected representatives from MVLA and several of their staff members. And the purpose of this tri-government meeting is for us to start talking about sort of overarching approach to the school strategy. But one of the requests that were made in the April meeting was for us to bring back questions from the board that we could pose at this particular body so that we could gather information. And so what we are seeking is just, are there just an understanding of what questions the school board has that you would like for us to bring to this meeting, so that we can front load it and get the information and bring it back to the board either at a study session or in a public setting. And so this is really, it's just if there are questions, we just want to capture these that we can ask.
And this is all in regards to a comprehensive school strategy for all future development in Mountain View, or is this only for North Bay Shore?
No, this is a comprehensive school strategy approach. This is not exclusive to North Bay Shore.
Okay.
And just so you know, we just for everyone's sake, we did request a study session of all 3 governing bodies, and we landed on this meeting as opposed to a larger meeting.
So the original request was for every elected official from all 3 entities, and now we'll have 2 representatives.
Correct.
2 elected representatives from each of the 3
Correct.
bodies in
Yes.
the room. Thank you for clarifying.
Wait,
All right.
so is that like a committee or a subcommittee, or what is that?
It's the same group of people who met back on May 1st to ask for this joint session, and we were denied. That would be too unruly. It would be really too challenging to get that many people's schedules coordinated.
Okay.
And then a school strategy was presented on October 15th.
All right. Thank you, Tim.
Mm-hmm. So, Trustee Blakely, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I would like to know what funding sources the city might have to make available for the funding of new public schools, including land and construction. As I recall, the North Bay Shore bond that the city authorized in November last year, it was something like $100 million, but there was a $20 million wiggle room in there, depending on who was going to be funding the bike overpass. And if Google was perhaps going to do that, there might be they might have some bonding capacity. We've been hearing that they want us to look at our bonding capacity, and I'd also like to know what bonding capacity the city might have. Because it looked like there might have been potentially a $20 million delta in what was authorized last November.
Thank you, Trustee Blakely. I'd like to know if there's a way for us to examine, since I know a lot of the new development is looking at these packages of community benefits and the school strategy they're trying to fold into that. I'd like to know if we can look at the parcel level, how much of our open school space as well as our MURs are used for general public use. And people come in and use our track and field space. How much is that accounted for in the city's open space requirements? Because oftentimes their community benefits packages for open space and parklands are predominantly larger for those uses versus schools, where we do provide a lot of those services. And I think it would be interesting to see how that pans out in the north side of town versus the south side of town, which is less land rich. So I think having that kind of information might be very useful. I guess that was more of a comment than a question.
Another question I have is they keep suggesting that perhaps transfer of development rights might be a significant funding source for us to use to build new schools and acquired land to build the schools on. And I am wondering whether they would allow us to sell development rights on property that we already own that is not as developed as densely as it might otherwise be able to be developed.
I would like to second that question.
Because otherwise, for the transfer of development rights to really be a viable funding source, we'd have to acquire new land and then build the school on it. But if we decided to, you know, redo some of our existing parcels with a different configuration, or just could we sell those rights without doing new construction?
I'm wondering if it would be worth.
Can
Oops. I'm
sorry.
I'm wondering if
Can I
it would.
build on that question?
Yes, go ahead, Trustee Conley.
And would the city would it be possible for them to do a zoning overlay to change the zoning from R3 on those parcels of ours, especially where there's a lot of park space, to increase the density of those parcels to make it possible to give us even more TDR to sell off of them?
Trustee Gutierrez?
Yeah, I have a question. So when I looked at number 7, I thought that was intriguing because that's the question many parents have been approaching me about, which is why did Mountain View take responsibility for an LASD school site at San Antonio when LASD has declining enrollment and unused space in its schools? I understand that Mountain View is generating students in the San Antonio area, but we are also addressing regional housing need, whereas Los Altos may not be. As we continue to add housing, do we foresee any additional obligations to LASD? Now, I take note to this response where it says, or the green language, as adopted in the San Antonio Precise Plan, the city had an objective to develop a neighborhood-serving school in the area, given existing student population and expected growth north of El Camino Real. Now, since we took that obligation on ourselves with Vargas, what can the city do now to help us somehow alleviate some of that burden that we've taken on in that area? What options can they give us there that will be equivalent to what they gave Los Altos at San Antonio?
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback off of that because I'm curious, what would our package look like if we were to get the same sort of what I would consider pretty clearly defined school strategy offered to Los Altos School
Right.
District? Like, how would this pan out in terms of if this were equally applied to both Mountain View, Wistman, and MVLA? What would that look like? Maybe city staff could produce some sort of approximation in terms of values, TDRs. I mean, because effectively the TDRs for this are now in East Wistman, and now we have more students over here, and their school that we just built is near capacity.
At capacity, yeah.
I think that might be a useful exercise, especially in terms of equity
I think that makes
and
sense.
approach.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm also interested in exploring a little further the conversation that had come up in item 6 that was on the responses to the questions that City Council had asked at the October meeting, which is about could some of the fee responsibility, if it was a fee and not a land dedication, be shifted from residential towards commercial, because they explain that because there's a lot more residential construction, you'd have to proportionally increase the burden on the commercial by a much greater amount to yield the same amount of financial benefit to the school districts. And those numbers that they used in the example are different, for example, than the $5 for residential and $25 for commercial that they're using for the community benefit piece for the East Wistman Precise Plan that was just approved.
yeah.
And so I'm just really curious, like, how do you come to the formula? And if it's that we need to give them a number for that, can that drive the, can we start with the end number that we need rather than just some kind of pie in the sky formula that they come up with and
Well,
then apply it?
So it sounds like to me like, in essence, if you're going to develop a school strategy from the city council perspective, they need to have more input from the school districts themselves as to how that will work. And if they don't have that input from us, and we try as much as we can, it can't be a one-sided conversation. I'm sorry, I don't mean to preach here, but I just can't help but to think the missed opportunities the city had before this. All the growth, all the development, all the construction, both in housing and in commercial development from years past, where there was no school strategy. If something would have been done back then, as opposed to now, we wouldn't be in this situation. So I'm glad that we're bringing this up now.
Is there any way for city staff to examine, has there ever been projects of this magnitude in real estate markets that are, I mean, clearly ours is an anomaly, but any growth of this size would happen in an economically vibrant area? What kinds of strategies in some kind of a similar situation are used for schools? Could we ask that they look into that? In terms of, like, they're like, oh, we should be responsible for 33% based on development, and that's their recommendation. Was that some formula that is based on evidence or past history or some sort of precedent
believe
set
at the-
somewhere else nationally?
I believe at the city council meeting, the planner said that there were three parties, the schools, the developer, and the city, and so that was how they came up. I mean, he explained that during the meeting. There was just one third, one third, one third.
Which is really interesting, given what we know about all the different revenue streams and how quite disparate they are amongst those three entities. So I just think it would be interesting to see. I mean, I don't know if there's other examples of 10,000 units. or
I'm wondering if they'd
9850.
have to look outside of California, because I think what's so unique about this is that this area is so densely developed already. There are other places, like in the Central Valley, when there's a huge new development going in, everybody appreciates there's a school and there's a lot of land. I mean, even if you drive up to San Francisco, you get past the airport, there's a lot of land. But we don't have a lot of land in Silicon Valley. And there's other areas like San Jose where there's a bunch of shuttered schools that haven't been sold, so
Would
those
there
could
be
be
somewhere in New
repurposed.
York, maybe, where they
Well, that's what I'm
redeveloped,
wondering,
where it's
maybe.
already dense, or the
Yeah,
eastern
maybe.
seaboard is. I'm
Yeah.
just wondering. There's
Dense.
got to be some kind of area where a large development came in that, of any kind of magnitude would need a school, and what kind of percentages that they played with. I get that the funding structures are different, it's different states, but just for some kind of comparative purposes. Trustee Conley? Looking at this black box, it's kind of weird. Are you there? We lost her?
Yes,
Oh,
I'm here.
there
I'm
she is.
here. I'm here. I don't have anything further to add.
Trustee Blakely?
Well, it had, as Dr. Rudolph said at the city council meeting the other evening, things have gotten somewhat confrontational and everybody's posturing. I mean, I believe our district is in good faith, really trying to examine the needs that we have, the projected, the new student numbers of how many students, and really trying to realistically figure out how much school facilities we'll need and then what those costs would be. But I would also like to, and Dr. Rudolph suggested that we all need to kind of come with an olive branch and be more open-minded and creative and receptive rather than posturing, and I appreciate that. And so in that vein, I'm wondering, are there things that the schools could be doing to benefit the cities, and or the developers? I mean, are there things we're not thinking about because we're not thinking big enough, where there's something that we might be able to accommodate them with without great expense to us that would be of a useful value to the other parties?
Well, that's perfect, because I think when you look at our spaces, especially with the redevelopment of many of our on-campus MURs, there has to be some sort of availability there of space. And I know one of the interests that we all have in common is to try and do some after-school program of some sort. Well, if those spaces are available and they're not being used, can we partner up with them to try and figure that out and how that can be used for their benefit? And I think Trustee Margaret Abakoga had also mentioned the use of the larger MURs at the middle school sites, both at Crittenden and Graham, since they're both operated under a joint venture program between the city and us, possibly exploring that or those two options for accommodating emergency overnight options for people in distress. I know she mentioned that at the city council meeting maybe 3 weeks ago or 4, I'm not sure. But those are opportunities that I think we should jump on to try and figure out how we can help them also.
It could even be like using the MU or the theaters for, you know, corporate presentations or something, if the city provided staff, because there's the mechanics of operating those and keeping them in good shape and stuff. They need to be operated by technical people that are properly trained to use those facilities. But maybe the city would pay for the janitorial staff and a technical person, and, you know, the companies could rent them out when they're doing a presentation, when they have you know, holding conferences. I don't know. I'm just, things like that where it would benefit everybody, but then we could get some more what we need in terms of building school capacity.
That sounds like a good idea.
I do have one more question. Is it possible, or does the city consider, and maybe this is sort of what you already asked earlier, Trustee Wilson, but does the city consider the open space of a new school part of the community benefit provided by a developer? Not just we as schools contribute this, but could the school space that includes land or the MUR that other people can use, or the recreation centers at the middle schools, could that be rolled into the community benefit package the developer is providing, so it's an incentive for the developer?
Have we given you a substantive amount of material?
Yep. So what we'll do is we'll take these 12 questions, we'll type them up, and then we'll send them over. We'll send it to all of the parties with the expectation that the city will be able to answer, and then hopefully they will do the same for us before our meeting.
I would just have one more question. Are there other stakeholders whose perspective should be solicited now, you know, as part of this conversation? Someone had suggested to me that perhaps some of the housing advocates, if we could get them on our side, I don't know if they'd have other ideas, but, or maybe there's other I don't know if there are other stakeholders. Like, are we looking at this question in too small of a manner? And, you know, I don't know that that's critical, but perhaps when you get more, you know, great minds, you come up with more ideas.
Well, yeah, because it's more community-minded, right? So you have a different approach to the perspective, and if you have more input from different stakeholders, then what you get in the end is a positive, much more positive result than what you get just between 2 or 3 agencies. I hear what you're saying, but is it possible to explore that, Dr. Rudolph, and ask that question as well?
I think one of the things we heard about earlier was, you know, concern is about senior citizens and being able to use parks. Mm-hmm. And, you know, if you look in places like China or in Asia, where the parks are used by senior citizens because they have dedicated exercising areas for them to use. And so I think if that's one of the considerations or one of the concerns that City Council has, is it possible that as we're looking at open space that we incorporate little sections like that? Mm-hmm. I think that's an example of engaging another stakeholder or a group of stakeholders to understand what opportunities exist for shared or for increased partnerships.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough.
All right, I think you have enough to go on.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, trustees. I think now we'll move on to the iReady update, item C.
So trustees, I'd like to propose, do you all think we have enough time? There's 30 minutes for iReady and 30 minutes for single plans. Dr. Rudolph, do you think we'll be able to make it by 10, or after the iReady update, should we consider extending the meeting?
Ms. Victor. Yeah, so I think right now I think we are good. So just a reminder that there's no presentation for the single site plans because of the process we currently use. So really what we're seeking is approval of the plan. I think there's one community card to discuss that. And then if there's any questions that you have. We have some of the principals here. I received a text that I guess the other principals who were supposed to join us remotely were on, their flight was delayed. Did they just? Okay. And so they will be joining us in the event that you have questions for them. But I think unless there's, something, a lot of questions that come up, I think we should be good. And just for the record, I know I've informed the board, but I do have a flight to go to the same conference that some of our principals are at. So in the event that I need to leave, I will be joining the remainder of the meeting remotely as I drive to the airport. And I will finish it in the airport. So hopefully, before I take off, the meeting will finish. Gotta love technology.
Thank you.
And I'm going to really streamline this iReady presentation and make sure we keep moving. So iReady, of course, is aligned to our strategic plan goals 1 and 2 and our board goal of ensuring that all students make a year's growth. Why did we move to iReady? Really, this was about feedback from teachers. Data is a foundation of what we do with our students and the ability to plan instruction for all children. And our teachers felt like they really needed a more consistent way to monitor growth across all grades. Our former assessments only covered grade level standards and did not give teachers data about how students were doing if they were struggling and below grade level or excelling and above. And so this provides an opportunity for teachers to really see the whole picture for children. I think Dr. Rudolph mentioned earlier, it aligns very closely with SBAC because it is computer adaptive and really gives us a little bit more detail about the intensive needs of our students. We also heard the feedback loudly and clearly from our parent community that we need some more ways to share information about student progress throughout the year. We also, of course, have our needs to really have a robust assessment to help us with math placement in our middle schools, not just about grade level assessment, but where are our children so that we can place them in the absolute best math pathway when they get to that middle school. And then finally, it really is important for us to be able to align with our neighboring districts. Our high school district requires an incoming 9th grade assessment that is similar across both schools. And Los Altos is using iReady as well. So it helps us better align with their math pathways and support our high school too. So many reasons to make the adjustment from our former assessments to the current iReady. So a little quick timeline. In May, we used iReady to do the math placement tests. We gathered feedback from teachers, from principals, and decided to move forward and replace those benchmarks with iReady. We provided training. We've done Diagnostic 1 and sent some preliminary information home to families. And then we purchased the instructional program for all sites just very recently this October. I'll get into those a little bit more. So really quickly, iReady is an online program that does 2 different things. It gives us all of the data that we need to understand students' needs. And then it also provides us an opportunity to have an interactive learning environment targeted specifically to the results of their assessments. Within the iReady system, we have many diagnostic reports available based on those 3 assessments they take throughout the year. I've detailed each one of them out for you. Half of our reports are really specific to our district and school use. And then we have some reports that are really specific and supportive for our families. And I'm going to not talk to this slide, but I'm going to show you what these look like. So on the first report, it's really a high-level overview. It tells us whether our children are doing really well and are on grade level, have a little bit of extra work to do, or are in the red and have 2 or more years worth of growth to make up. And then it gives us a little bit of information about each of the domains in reading and in math as well. And from a very high perspective and view, we can see where we need to focus our attention with our students. Going a little bit deeper, we can have teachers look at their class report. Much like the district overview, this gives them a classroom overview, shows them where their children are at in their classroom on each of those domains, and then shows student per student the performance of each of their students in class. One of our, I think, favorite reports is this instructional grouping report. When a teacher's class is all completed, this assessment, the system will provide a report and group the children based on their instructional needs. And so a teacher might have, as in this report, 5 different groups. The children in group 1 may all need support with phonics instruction. The children in group 2 may all need support with vocabulary development. Children in group 3 might need support with reading comprehension, and children in groups 4 and 5 might need enrichment in different areas. But because of the depth of the reports available in the system, teachers can have a really nice layout of where are my children and what instructional strategies do I have to support all of them in these different groups. Then we're moving on to the student diagnostic report for teachers. This gives teachers a really deep dive into each individual student. This report will tell the teacher what can the student do really well and what are their next steps for instruction in each one of the domains. And it's really detailed so that the teacher knows how to best support that child in the classroom. And then we're going to move into the families report. So the 4 families report was the first piece that our parents saw after diagnostic 1. It is a straightforward basic overview with how is my child doing performance-wise at grade level and in each one of the domains for reading or for math. In diagnostic 1, it was baseline information. This was taken within the first couple of weeks of school. And so there wasn't a lot of information to share, but this was kind of the baseline, and the baseline for which we measure growth for the remainder of the year. After diagnostic 2 in December, we'll be able to send another 4 families report, but this one is going to show growth. So it will show the results from diagnostic 1 in August and how it compares to the diagnostic test that's been taken in December. So again, this will give information about where my child is in each of the domains, and then how much have they grown throughout the year and how can I best support them at home. In addition to that, after diagnostic 2, parents will be receiving this Common Core student performance report. This will identify each of the grade level standards that a child needs to know within that grade level. In diagnostic 1, it was not appropriate to send this home. Children hadn't been taught any of their grade level standards. It would not have been a very valuable report. By December, we certainly hope that children are making gains and making progress toward those grade level standards. When this report comes home, and you'll see in this example, there's a green check for one standard, that means that child has completely mastered that standard. Below it, you'll see an open check. That means the child has partially mastered that standard. And then you'll also see there are some boxes that are empty. That means that the child either didn't take any questions that were covered on that standard, maybe they're a couple of years below or well above, and just didn't get any questions on that standard, or that's a standard that hasn't been covered in class yet, and that's okay too. But this is a nice way for us to monitor and make sure that we know where children are in grade level content. And parents will receive that and hopefully give them much more in-depth information about progress in diagnostic 2. So I want to take you back, and I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, with our overall results for diagnostic 1 that was taken back in August and September. And as I go through these reports, the green means you are at grade level. Yellow means you are 1 year below grade level. However, at the beginning of the year, that's where we expect you to be. The red means you're 2 or more years below and you have some growth that needs to be made throughout the year. And so this report might look very familiar. So by site and by grade level, you'll notice that these are very, very similar to the scores we saw in the SBAC in the CASP report. They mirror very much the data that we saw there. If you'll notice, looking at grade levels in reading, in grades K2, we really focus on foundational skills. In grades 3 and 4, comprehension is really focused on understanding the data or understanding the story and being able to refer to the information from the text. In grades 5 through 8, it's really about analyzing and interpreting the information in the story. So the complexity of the comprehension questions and text grows as the grade levels grow. So where children start to struggle with comprehension, those needs get bigger and bigger as the demands get more and more challenging along the way. And I'm going to take you through just a site-by-site quick glimpse into each site's overview, reading assessment data from the beginning of the year. And like I said, this should look very familiar to you because the data is tremendously similar to the results we just looked at in October for CASP. And I'm not going to read all of these baseline results, but we do notice that the biggest deficits in reading are in vocabulary and comprehension, pretty equally between literature and informational text. Really important for teachers to know as they plan their core instruction and really focus on the reading skills that they're going to teach whole group. And if we look at the math, I'm not going to spend as much time here because the story is very similar, right? School for school and grade level for grade level, we see the very same trends that we shared when we looked at our CASP scores. In fact, I went through and looked, and our third grade scores are identical to our incoming fourth grade scores on iReady. And so it's fascinating to see that link and the strength in this assessment. So baseline results in math. The one thing I want to highlight is where we see specific deficits in certain domains in reading. The same is not so much true in math. They're really spread across all domains. So we know that we've got to really focus on each of those different domains in math equally and make sure our students are strong in all of them so that they can progress throughout the grade levels. Really critically important. So I want to move in a little bit now to the instruction, because the first thing we need to do is take the diagnostic assessment. We need to really analyze the results, and then that gives us the ability to use the instructional program effectively. The instructional program is really the online lessons. It's a really personalized learning path for children based on the results of their diagnostic assessment. But really, and they can go online and they can interact with the lessons, take quizzes. It monitors their progress. They can retake a lesson if they need to until they master it. Teachers get reports on the progress of those children along the way. But the power really comes with the way this program can be used in the classroom. And our RTI platform provides a perfect opportunity for this to really have a positive effect. This is really to be used as a blended learning model. It's not that we want children to just sit on a computer and learn. It's an opportunity for teachers to give children something really productive and targeted to do while they work with a small group and do targeted specific instruction from the teacher. The beauty of this is there are lessons provided to the teacher for those small group sessions, or teachers can create their own based on the needs of students. But this is where iReady becomes a powerful system, is to be able to help further differentiate all of that instruction and target some really great teacher-led instruction for kids. The other beauty is children have access to this at home as well. And so they can continue that learning and continue that work and growth in all of their skills, whether they're at school or at home. And so it really provides a lot of opportunities for children to fill in gaps or just keep growing and gaining forward. So next steps for us will be to continue to utilize the iReady assessments to conduct the data analysis. Again, we'll have our next round of assessments in December, and we'll be able to take a deep dive into that data and really look at where our children are making great growth and gains and where we still have some more work to do. And we will be able to, like Dr. Rudolph mentioned, really monitor the progress of our students who are up for reclassification, really monitor the progress of our English learners. This gives us an additional way to see where our students are and how they're making gains along the way. Oftentimes when we have children who struggle, we don't see a lot happening at grade level, but we can sure see what's happening if they move from a first grade level to a third grade level over the course of a year. So this is a beautiful way for us to monitor all of that progress. We will have some reporting out on the growth after diagnostic 2. And one of the big next steps is this was an optional assessment for kindergartners this year. And we have learned very quickly the power of having kindergartners access the instructional program too. So all kindergarten students will utilize the program in the upcoming year. Professional development will continue to be a part of iReady. Our middle schools were able to have some iReady training this week for their RTI programs to help continue to build and grow. And additional training will happen to keep our teachers further utilizing the program. We also, based on the math results that we went through fairly quickly, and we talked about this in our CAS report as well, we do have some sessions set up for Castro and Mauna Loma and our middle school teachers. Some have already begun, and some will be starting soon to really support them with their math growth at those schools who have some additional struggles. Next steps for RTI, fabulous, robust program. This allows us to have another lens and another set of data to really support that great targeted differentiated instruction. So our schools are all really digging into this data a little bit differently to really make sure that they are targeting the exact skills and needs that their children have. And teachers are digging into some of those online lessons that are available for them to use in their small groups as well. After the December assessment and diagnostic 3 at the end of the year, we will be sending those reports home to families. And after the next diagnostic, it won't just be one report for each subject, it will be 2. So they will get the 4 families growth report in addition to that standards report that will give more information to our parents to help support their children in mastering all of those standards by the end of the year. And then finally, our math placement will take place again for all of our 5th graders and our middle school students to make sure that we're really utilizing all of our data to make sure that all of our children are situated in the appropriate math course when they move on to the next grade level. We will also be really looking at a math placement policy and really working and growing through the expectations for each grade level based on the iReady assessments. We've got some nice cut points for 6th grade now coming in, and we'll keep growing and continuing to add on to our 7th grade and then 8th grade and building a robust placement policy. And I think this is really important for our students and for our families to understand exactly what we're looking at as we go into our middle school math courses. And then we will also share these the end of the year diagnostic assessment from our 8th graders. Their data can be shared with the high school to support their math courses at the high school as well. So we'll continue to be able to share that information with the high school to help our 8th graders have an awesome freshman year at the high school too. All right, how is that for Tyler? Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Vickier.
Sure.
We'll open it up to questions from trustees. Trustee Gutierrez?
Okay, I've got 2 questions. So I'm intrigued about the groupings. How often do the teachers do the instructional groupings? I've always wanted to ask, and I never have until now.
So that instructional grouping report becomes available after every assessment that is given to the children. And so the teachers in our elementary especially, and in our middle school RTI classes, the teachers have really been utilizing those reports to say, wow, this makes my RTI grouping really easy now because I know exactly who needs the most intensive level of intervention and what are the topics they need. Because if I have a 3rd grader who is in tier 3 and has some really intensive needs, I might think about starting some lessons on comprehension, but it turns out phonics is really what they need. And as a 3rd grade teacher, I don't teach phonics, all the time, so I might not have realized that. This really helps to lay it out explicitly for every teacher to know where to start and how to build and grow every lesson for the kids. And so those are available at the end of every diagnostic assessment.
Okay. Thank you. And then my second question, it goes back to the iReady program. I'm all about, everybody wants their child to succeed, no matter what. Doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. That's one goal we all have in common. But I worry about screen time. So when I hear that students can also log on to their iReady program at work, at school, and work on their lessons, I like the concept, but is there a way to monitor screen time so that it doesn't get out of proportion and blown up into something that it shouldn't be?
I think that is on every teacher's mind, where teachers also feel very strongly that, students need to have books in hands, they need to have, pencils in their hands, they really need to have classroom time with the teacher. And so teachers are very cognizant of that. And for instance, in the RTI, I've been in many classrooms, thank you, I've been in many classrooms that are utilizing this, and there might be in an RTI intervention class, 10 children in the room because the rest are in the science classroom. Of the 10 children in the room, 5 of them are on iReady for 15 minutes while the teacher is running a small group lesson with the other 5 children. And then they will switch for the next 15 minutes, right? So the kids are only online for 15 minutes, and then the teacher will do a whole class wrap-up. We're not talking about having kids doing only online learning. It is just a tool to really support that intensive work with the teacher individually with them.
Oh, no, I get that. It's just, I'm sorry, my mic is loud. But when it comes down to just being able to have the option to work on their lessons at home, I'm just wondering, is there a way for us to monitor the amount of screen time that they actually have then? Because it could be that, hey, if you're really interested, that's great. But if you're going to spend 2 hours on this every day,
Right.
yeah, that,
So-
That might be a little bit much.
So through the Clever portal, we can track the usage of any type of program that our kids have. What we noticed, though, is that some schools had already went through and purchased the ELA and the math component, and those teachers were assigning the activities as like 20 minutes of homework. And then other schools that had made the decision because they may not have had the financing to purchase the materials were not assigning that. And so we wanted to give every student the option and every parent the option to be able to use it. You don't have to, but you at least have the option, or it's available to you. Especially after the second report comes out, there may be parents who are like, I notice my kid is really struggling in this, but is really advanced in this way. They can opt to use it, but we're not officially saying you have to do X, Y, and Z. It is truly an option that exists. And I think, as I said to the board when we first, earlier this year, it's, for $143,000, we've effectively created an after-school tutor for every single kid in our district if a parent chooses to use it.
thank you.
I have a question to sort of segue off your first question, in that when teachers are seeing that there's a deficit in some specific area, is the content, when they say, hey, you need to work on something, are these content domains, can you assign something like, hey, this child needs to work on measurement and data? Are they organized by those specific domains?
So there
Or
are
is there a crossover? Sorry to interrupt.
there are 2 different ways that the system can work. A child can just go into their learning path, and the system will start with a specific domain, the one that is the most primary foundational skill that's needed, and build and grow from there.
Okay.
If a teacher, however, wants to say, you know what, I really need this child to work on measurement and geometry because that's what we're working on next week, and I need them to really have some practice, they can assign that lesson instead of the instructional path.
I understand.
Once the child finishes that, they can go back to their regular instructional path. So there are some options that make it really valuable and useful, depending on whether we want children to just continue on their own path or whether a teacher wants to be really structured and specific.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Other trustees?
So I'm wondering, what kind of feedback have we been getting from the sites, from the teachers and the principals who are using this? And this is the first year we've used this, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
Correct.
So I'm curious what the reaction has been so far.
This is the first year we're using it district-wide. Landals has been using it for a few years, and they have had fabulous, tremendous feedback about the instructional lessons and the data that has been coming to them from iReady. For the schools that are just using it now, I have heard, actually just this week, from Castro that the kids are more engaged in these lessons than any other program that they've had in the past. And they're loving it. They're coming to school early in the morning to be able to go and sit in the cafeteria and do the online lessons with iReady because they're really excited about it. So that's been really positive. I've also heard from some teachers at Montaloma that they've really been enjoying the instructional program there too. And I think all teachers are really liking the fact that they can see more information about the students than they've had in the past to help them really target their lessons.
And I would just say in the superintendent coffees that I've had at several elementary schools, the question has came up about how do I get more information to understand how my kid is doing? Because the first report was simply looked like your CAS report. It just said, here's the score that you got, and this is, this is sort of where you are. And the second report that's coming out will be a lot more useful. And I think not today, because I didn't have enough time, but when I was at Stevenson and I showed the second report, which is the one that Mrs. Victor went over that had the actual Common Core standards, parents were like, that's exactly what I need so that I can help my kid move forward. And then so that, I think and they were really intrigued by the growth metric also, because I think parents want to make sure that their kids are actually growing in the class. And so at least the parents that I met with, the 20 or so parents I met with at Stevenson, were super excited to get both of those reports in December.
Okay. And the other question I was going to ask is what kind of diligence we did before acquiring this program. But I think you said Landell's used site money and has been using it for a couple of years.
Mhm.
And then our neighboring school district has been using it. Does the high school district use it too, or is it just K to 8?
The high school district uses it as their math placement for incoming ninth graders.
Okay. But so the feedback that we've received has been generally positive.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from trustees in the room? Trustee Conley, I think the mic is off. Hold on one moment. There you go.
Oh,
Yep,
can you hear me?
we can.
Great. So from a teacher perspective, this makes me want to go work in a Mountain View classroom because it has so much useful data. And when I worked with parents in the past, and I sat down at parent-teacher conferences near the beginning of the year, I would take my diagnostic assessment and go through, I haven't taught any of this yet this year, but this is where your child is entering this grade level. They already know some of these things. Here are the things that they haven't even touched yet. And then I would give parents a few specific things to start working on. And so when Dr. Rudolph talks about parents being so excited about the CCSS student performance report that breaks down the standards for parents, I feel like there's an opportunity to align our parent-teacher conferences with that information, because that is how we can best leverage parent engagement and parent support at home to help students meet the standards that they're struggling in. So I wonder if you could speak to more about the decision to not include that information with the diagnostic up front, but to wait until December, and if you think there's a feasible way for teachers and parents to meet again after they have that data, or if there's something we can do going forward so that when parents have those Common Core state standards, teachers are giving them activities to say, okay, you see this in the data, here's what you can do at home to help your child meet this.
I totally appreciate that question and have been thinking quite a bit about that. And as I said earlier, the Common Core report would not have been as useful in the beginning of the year after Diagnostic 1 because the students were brand new to the grade level. And if your child had already mastered those standards, you probably knew that because they had exceeded the grade level before. Which is why in December, it becomes really important to be able to send that home. So it's a progress report midway to make sure students are making their way through those grade level standards. And I think that is where conversations with teachers is going to become really important. If your child is not making that progress, what can we do to support? I think planning ahead for next year's conferences will be really important, and as teachers are much more comfortable by that time with the use of the iReady system, they will be able to really have some great conversations in October about student progress and performance based on all of that data. And we'll look into more information that can be shared at the beginning of the year as we continue down our path of utilizing the program.
So you think October's,
Oh, sorry.
no, you go ahead.
What I heard from parents was that they were really mystified by the original report because they wanted to start off the year in that parent-teacher conference knowing where their child was and what they could help them concretely to do to move forward.
Maybe a good segue question is, will there ever be sort of a bridge data between the prior year and the current year, since now we just started implementing it? So, I mean, you would obviously know at the end of the third trimester where you're at, but you're starting a new school year. Do they provide data of that sort that bridges the grades?
We will be able next year to look at this year's data and compare it to next year's data. So the more we use the system, the more data we have available, and the more information and comfort teachers will have also in looking at all of those different reports and being able to share out with parents how children are doing in every aspect.
That makes sense.
But that still doesn't limit the parents from being able to take the initiative once they get the report and speak to their teachers, because they do have the ability and the right to be able to do something like that and figure things out that way, I would think, too,
Absolutely
right?
true.
It just, I was at the Mauna Loma event this morning along with Trustee Wheeler, and one of the thoughts in the back of my mind was, would it make any sense to schedule parent-teacher conferences after you have that first data? It seems kind of late in the year, like people want to know earlier on, but the data would be more useful then for parents. I don't know.
It's something that we've been discussing now that we have this type of information.
Are there other questions from trustees? Members of the public? And additional comments? Trustee Conley?
No, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms.
All
Victory.
right, thank you.
Thank you.
And now we'll move on to the single plans for student achievement. Mrs. Bauer?
Okay, so tonight I'm here to ask for your approval for the single plans of student achievement for all of our schools. As you know, we went through a little bit of a different process this year. While our sites are still required to work with their staffs, their ELACs, and their school site councils to develop their plans and eventually have their plans approved by the school site council and then by you, we actually had the sites post their plans on the district website effective October 8th through October 28th for feedback, so that our community could see them, people could give additional feedback. So again, we have principals hanging out. They're listening and here. And so if you have further questions, and then at the end I'll be just asking for a motion to approve all the plans.
Thank you, Mrs. Bauer. And I'll just elaborate a little bit on the new process that we implemented this year. We released these over a month ago to the trustees, so we would have time to pour over it, look at it, submit questions, and there were a lot of questions, and get good feedback and detailed feedback, I think, rather than putting people up on the podium and on the spot in the moment. And I know they're long, but they'll be posted online at some point. Are they already there?
They are already on the 7th. We posted them on the district's website as drafts, and then they were also posted on the school sites. What will take place now is once they are approved, they will be removed, and then the approved ones will actually go up there.
I guess I meant the questions that the trustees asked would be posted.
They're already on the
They're
website.
already there. Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll open it up for questions.
Yeah, I have a quick question. How many parents chimed in?
Well, I don't know that because they didn't ask me. They would have asked their school site. I know that we have a community member here who chimed in over at Crittenden. I know he went to a school site council meeting and provided some feedback. But that would be a question for the principals. I did not get any real feedback from the community, but that would have gone straight to the principal.
But they're also like the DLAC is involved in the school site councils, and so there are parent groups that are involved all along the way.
So the plan is developed with input through the staff, the school site council, and the ELAC at the site.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, trustee questions? Trustee Conley?
I submitted significant questions ahead of time. So I think I'm good for right now.
Were they answered?
You know, they were answered quite thoroughly.
Okay.
I would say the same. I submitted a number of questions, and I really, to all of you principals out there, I really appreciated the thoughtful answers. They were very enlightening and went right to my questions. So thank you very much.
Okay, I think we'll move on to community comments. We have,
We get a, oh, I'm sorry. We have to,
But we have to have, there's a comment from the public.
that's why I
for
was-
this one. Oh, my bad. I thought that was something separate.
Where,
No, it's my bad.
okay.
Yeah.
Adam Jones, would you like to step up to the podium?
Oh,
Oh.
Conley be able to?
You're-
Thank you for sharing.
We
That's so nice
deliver.
of you.
Thank you, Trustee
you.
Blakely.
Hi, I'm Adam Jones, the parent of an 8th grade student at Crittenden Middle School. I am here to request that you refuse to approve the Crittenden school plan because it was not developed or approved by the site council. Although I'm not a member of the site council, I attended the last site council meeting on October 23rd. Mrs. Gomez gave a 45-minute presentation. The plan was not distributed or discussed in any detail. No motion was made to approve it, and no vote took place. Members made suggestions that were never incorporated into the document. You can see on page 32 that the statement, "This SPSA was adopted by the SSC at a public meeting on," does not include a date of adoption. I also gave my input by submitting 40 annotations before that meeting. Not one of those suggestions, even including corrections of basic errors, was incorporated. A principal's coffee took place on October 25th, during which Mrs. Gomez gave her presentation again. Although several people offered suggestions and a PTA representative that mentioned her group wanted to be involved in the creation of the plan, no changes were made and no follow-up meetings were scheduled. To give a couple examples of the most glaring problems, on page 12, school goal number 2 related to math has a blank strategy section. On page 19, school goal number 4 related to human capital does not explain what the new structure and protocol for the PLC teams are or why they will be more effective. There are many more fundamental mistakes, from failing to look at cohort data to the false assumption that targeting the lowest performing students will result in quantitative proficiency gains. California Education Code Section 64001 requires that, quote, "A local educational agency shall ensure that the SPSA has been prepared in accordance with the law, that school site councils have developed and approved a SPSA for each school." The entire purpose of school site councils is to ensure that schools incorporate input from parents, teachers, other staff members, and often students in the planning process. It is entirely inappropriate that in this case, the Crittenden principal created the plan, refused to seek or incorporate community input, and falsified the claim that the site council approved it. I request that you direct the school site council to start from scratch and create a new plan that incorporates input from the entire community regarding how to improve student achievement as the state envisioned. School administrators should neither lead those discussions nor make independent decisions about what actions to pursue. I have seen the prescribed approach drive dramatic score gains, while principal-centric planning usually results in the kind of stagnation that plagues Crittenden year after year. This is a poorly written plan that was created through an ineffective process. Not only should you reject it because it fails our students, you may not legally approve it because California law requires site council approval, which this plan does not have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
So,
I'm wondering, do we want to ask the principal of Crittenden to provide some context for these remarks? We need a mic.
here, I'll do it.
Oh, the point. Good evening. Good evening, everybody. So yes, Mr. Jones did come to our school site council meeting, our last one we had, and he did present his input for our school site council plan, our site plan. And the school site council decided to move forward with the plan, and we all, obviously any input is important to us. I know he also came to our principal coffee and provided some more input to us, and everything he mentioned. We are considering to definitely and working with our school site council and working with our staff with some of the input he provided. We also did speak to and met with our ELAC community and also school site council and our staff and also our coaches, instructional coaches, to create this plan.
So I have a question. I am looking at the page reference, and there is a blank strategy for math. Why is that the case?
To be honest, I wasn't aware of that one piece,
Okay.
but I will definitely looking for that more. Not sure which page. I don't have it in front of me, so I can't really speak to it.
It's 12 of 32. It's school goal number 2.
To go in
Yeah.
my computer and check real quick
No
because I don't have it in
worries.
front of me.
You had asked.
That would be the draft.
How do we approve a draft?
So,
So there
this
may
one
be
on
an
here that was
updated
included?
one.
The one that is in the board packet is? Okay. Okay, so the ones we posted on the website would have been the drafts. This would be the most recent one, so. Yeah.
The main page. Yeah.
Profile
Profile,
page.
So the goal says to provide a broad course of study to ensure that all students are prepared for high school with the academic skills and mindsets necessary for successful citizenship. And it just says that every student would be prepared for high school in the 21st century citizenship. So, and then it just simply says that there will be a percentage point increase of 4% in the number of students meeting or exceeding the standards in math as measured by CAS. It doesn't have a strategy. It does say district assessments. And then it has action items that are listed on page 13, 14, that correspond with it. So, I mean, at first glance, I'm just looking at this for the first time. So it's not like this is something that, but it appears to me that while the actual strategy may not be there, there are clearly action items that are listed on this. I would have to defer to Mrs. Bauer on this one, or Mrs. Victor.
I'm trying to look at the plan in front of me, and we're looking on
Page 12.
so the top is the LCAP goal, the second, the strategic plan above the goal is the district strategic plan goal, and then we have the school goal.
Right.
And we have the data used, the findings from the analysis of the data, and then if you scroll down,
There's,
school will evaluate the progress
mhm.
and keep going,
And then it has action items.
and it has action items. That's the typical setup of that piece.
So there's not usually a strategy
There's not a
outline.
strategy. On the profile page, the principals often list from
The
the list of actions their key strategies
Okay.
that are part of the action. So the strategic plan is the goal that aligns to our district strategic plan. That's consistent with other site plans. So I'm just wondering, what these the sites are also approved
Isn't that a criterion that
Yeah.
the two? And so I'm just wondering whether, if they didn't, I feel like maybe we should defer the approval of this one till the next month, or the next meeting, but if they did, I don't have access to that information. I rely on
Either
you.
date.
Yeah. ELAC, we met with them actually twice, and they did approve the plan, and we moved forward with their suggestions and their feedback. And also with our school site council, we met with them and discussed the draft first and ideas, came up with a plan together. And then second time around, which is when Mr. Jones came by, we presented the whole plan now finally after all the feedback was included, presented to the school site council.
And it has the SSC
Signature too.
signature, Angela Weller,
Our president. of the school site
signed
council.
on 10/23/19, and it also has the English Learner Advisory Committee has also signed off on
Yeah.
it.
Oh, hold on, we're trying to figure this one out. You need to be
He was-
patient, please.
So just to be clear, I want to make sure we get this whole story, the whole picture here.
Please, thank
So after we presented the school site plan, site plan, then we had opportunity for comments, public comments to share, and Mr. Jones shared his comments. And then from there, discuss with the school site council what their if they wanted to move forward, and then any questions or anything they wanted to add, and they wanted to move forward. To be officially saying that we approve the plan. I need to go look at the notes again in the minutes of that meeting to make sure that it was officially approved. I want to be fair with that.
That was my question. If
Yeah.
did they take a resolution and
Right.
formally approve it?
Right.
If they didn't, maybe we should wait until.
Right.
Sounds like most
Yeah.
of the motions, but
It sounds like, so if somebody were to come with a list of things that they would want maybe
Mhm.
added to a school site, the whole council would have to say yes
Exactly.
or no, or we
Yeah.
like this, or we,
Yeah.
but did this happen after, it sounds like, I didn't quite get the timeline, like this came sort of after second reading, if you will?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That clarifies it a little bit for me.
Yes.
But I'm happy to defer this one, just to make sure we get the vote and the date.
Sure.
And I'd like just to bring up quickly, I mean,
Sorry.
if I'm a parent, well, I am a parent, but when I'm looking at school goal number 2 on page 12 or 32, and with all due respect, when I look at the other school goals, there's strategy or strategies, and then there's a listing of strategy or strategies. So when you look at this one and there's nothing after the colon, there's questions to be asked, right? What's the strategy? I mean, I understand what the metrics say and what the boxes in terms of an action plan indicate, but I mean, it has to be C-spot run type of explanations. And if you see a blank there, but in the other ones there's
It's not,
information,
yeah.
then that inconsistency, I
that.
think.
I agree. I could agree with that, Tim.
Okay, so I think it sounds like to me then, when's your next site council meeting?
In a couple of weeks.
So what you would just do is amend the action to include all site plans with the exception of Crittenden. And then we would bring Crittenden back. If it's in a couple of weeks, it'll either come back for the board to approve either on the 21st or it will come back on the 12th.
On the first couple pages. I could correct that. That's,
And this is just a lesson learned in
Of
both
course.
democracy and then just,
yeah.
I'm sorry,
No, of course.
QCing, right? And
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Always important to cross our T's and dot our I's.
Well, especially when we ask our students to do the
I agree.
same, right?
Yes, I agree. Okay, no problem.
Okay. All right, do I have a motion?
Oh, can we make comments on this? before we vote?
Absolutely. My apologies. Trustee Conley?
First of all, I wanted to thank Dr. Rudolph and Ms. Vickyard and Ms. Bauer for taking the time to meet with me to discuss these school site plans in depth. And I'm really interested in how we can use the plans, not just at the individual school sites, but how we use them across all of our schools for communication with public, for how we develop our leadership and really share resources and knowledge across our schools and strategies, and as a way to inform the board for policy making. So when I first kind of tackled the plans, I was so appreciative of the month to dig into them, but I found that some of the goals the formatting was a little bit different, and some of the ordering was a little bit different, and I think the more that we can standardize our format, it will make it easier to compare across our sites. And I am also curious about how each of these goals, especially when we look at the achievement gap, what the sub-goals under the achievement gap can do to actually move our overall district performance forward. So I would love to see in the future, when we say we want to see 10% growth in all of these student group areas, like English language learners, students who are economically disadvantaged and students with disabilities, what does it mean if they make their growth to our overall school performance? Because I think that these are the levers that we push on. Do we need to funnel more resources into working with our students with disabilities? Do we need to funnel something different to English language learners? These are the levers that we have, and if we can better understand the impact those levers have on our overall district performance, like our overall performance on ELA, our overall performance on math, and then even the sub-goals under English language learners when we're talking about reclassifying students, when we're talking about performance of RFAPs, what does that mean for English learner achievement as a whole in our district? I would love to see us start to kind of utilize this more as a tool going forward.
I can support that. Thank you for your comments.
Sure, but I think we already do, right?
I think what, just reading Trustee Connolly's questions and then seeing the chart that she sent, which we actually took a stab at doing, we can kind of make a look at, you know, if we do meet our goals, what is that going to be? What impact is that going to make on our district as a whole? I think where we run into a little bit of trouble is that for reclassification, as Dr. Rudolph said, you score a 4 on the LPAC doesn't mean that you automatically are going to score a 4 on the CAS where you're going to meet or exceed standards. And so there is some uncertainty. The tests are computer adaptive, so it is a little hard, but I think that there are things that we can do to kind of project out where we're going, and I actually think iReady is going to help us do that quite a bit.
I'll just add one comment. I think in the future, I would recommend in the future, given the feedback I've heard from staff, that we maybe do a 5-week window and shut the questions down at least a week prior to give staff enough time to handle the sheer volume that they received. Because they were in depth, they were detailed, they were pointed, and really useful, but I know it took a lot of time to do, and I think you may have had 48 hours or less.
But we got them turned around.
You did.
So
it
was good.
Just in order to preserve good faith and will amongst all of us. I think at least I would like to make sure that, and hopefully people would agree, a week lead time at minimum, just for because staff has other things to do.
Thank you.
We learn from the process.
Absolutely.
I do want to add to Trustee Conley's comment. I do think that this new process allows us the opportunity to use these site plans in a more thoughtful way. Part of the reason why we revised the site plan process is because we wanted to make sure that the people who presented first didn't take the brunt of the questions compared to the people who presented last. And so I think this process, just based off of the sheer number of questions, really netted a more thoughtful approach and a more reflective set of answers than what we've ever had before. I also think, as Mrs. Bauer noted, that the use of iReady coupled with this new process will really start to get at some of those questions that you're asking, Trustee Conley, and will allow us to really dive in and look at particular subgroups to say, how can we target this particular school or this particular subgroup a little bit more? And now that we have so much more diagnostic data, is there additional professional development or additional needs that are now being identified that we didn't have information on before because the process was different and because we weren't as data rich?
Definitely, and I agree with Trustee Wilson about a week lead time for getting the questions in. I am one of the people who submitted my questions last minute because I spent so long making my spreadsheets. And next year I'll have my spreadsheets, so it should go faster.
Well, and I spent a while making my spreadsheet too, and it took some time to go through it. But I think if there was a way to like set up a spreadsheet even for us to evaluate, I mean, maybe you guys do that, a template so that we could, it might help.
Okay, since we only have.
I think that is, sorry, just one thing we can do. We can, I can work with President Wilson and as well as the rest of the board to sit down and figure out which version of the spreadsheet works. look at if it's possible for us to auto-populate that at the beginning of the year, now that we have sort of a basis for it. So, and then we can even bring that up in the retreat to see if this is something that's worthwhile, if we think everybody wants to use it. I think it's just a matter of, this is the first time that we went through it and that we have all this information in front of us. But I do believe that we could design something that's a little bit smoother, that increase the efficiency for everyone.
Yeah, I think we're on the right track. We've refined the process and we're getting much better feedback. Now we could just refine it a little bit further to make it smoother for everyone. We only have, I believe, less than 4 minutes left, so I'm going to ask for a motion on this, please. Would you like to comment? Okay. You want to extend the meeting?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I just choked on my
I-
Coke.
I'd like-
That's all.
So I'd like to make a motion.
Yes.
So I'd like to move that we approve the single plans for student achievement for Bubb Elementary School, Castro Elementary School, Graham Middle School, Huff Elementary School, Landells Elementary School, Mistral Elementary School, Montaloma Elementary School, Stevenson Elementary School, Torokoff Elementary School, and Vargas Elementary School as presented, and defer approval of the Crittenden School Plan until their school site council can meet again and revise their plan.
Formally approve.
Yeah,
Second.
formally.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, on a motion moved by trustee Wheeler and seconded by trustee Conley, the plans passed unanimously per the motion made by trustee Wheeler. And we'll move on now for items for future agendas. Seeing we have none, we have future board meeting dates are not listed here. I believe that they're on the website. And given we have limited time, unless there are pressing board updates, please feel free to email those to Ms. Lilga. And at, what do we have here?
9:58.
Thank you. At 9:58, we will adjourn this meeting of the Mountain View Westman School District Board of Trustees. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have
And thank you, everyone, for calling in. And good luck at the conference.
It was, yeah.